basically they don't go all in right away and say, oh, that's a great idea, let me quit my job and go in. They say, well... Hi, I'm Steve Gideon, a professor at one of the largest entrepreneurship programs in the world at the Ted Rogers School of Management at Ryerson University in Toronto, Canada. Today I'm back home again, at my home overlooking the Scarborough Bluffs, just a little bit east of the city of Toronto. It's day 120 of the lockdown. I haven't left the house in 4 months except to go to the grocery store or the liquor store. It's been hot. My hair was getting long. You see, my wife, for my birthday, bought me a hair cutting kit and shaved my head and left my DNA scattered all over the property, I suppose, with hair clippings. Haven't seen a single person in over 4 months, and I've been spending all of my time, well, talking to you and dealing with technology issues. So today I'm going to talk about the affordable loss principle, principle number 5. So far we've talked about the difference between planning and search, the difference between causal-based reasoning methods and effectuation-based methods. We talked about the bird in the hand principle, that you start with your means. We talked about the experimentation principle, or this diamond approach to discovering the laws of the world around you, discovering the laws of the market, this proactive process by which you experiment and use the scientific method to understand the world around you and what's going to work. We talked about the third entrepreneurial principle around radical collaboration and the crazy quilt, that be open to working with other people and to have your plans change as you co-create the future in this crazy quilt approach. We talked about a wide variety of tools that you start with the wheel of life and go through some other tools to eventually come up with a set of career design challenges. And we talked about some design challenges in the area of a job or an employer or entrepreneurship. We talked about having a side hustle or startup, or a way to build that human capital, your knowledge, skills, and attitudes outside of your job, that you need to build sources of human capital outside of your current job in order to get the next job. That's a big difference between a job and a career. We talked about building your social capital through events and volunteering or social change-making projects. We talked about some design challenges around your character and your habits and your personal growth. And we talked about some challenges around just the whole balance around the wheel of life. We then introduced the fourth major entrepreneurship principle around user centricity. We talked about 4 major kinds of users and introduced you to the literature on the subject. We talked about over 6 different books that arise from a wide variety of different methodologies around user centricity. We talked about a variety of tools around user centricity, and in particular introduced the idea of the double diamond, that rather than starting with the solution, you first look at the problems, divergent and convergent thinking around the problems that your users have, and then divergent convergent thinking around the solutions and how to test the solutions and whether they meet the problem or not. We then talked about a wide variety of different methods and tools and books and textbooks available and how these all map onto this double diamond. And I gave you some cognitive structure around how to be empowered to understand the literature and to watch all these videos on YouTube and read some of these really excellent books. Then the question came up, which design challenge, which tool to use, which customer to focus on? And this is where I need to give you a warning, that beware of step-by-step causal-based thinking approaches. That a lot of these tools and methods that you read about in the books, they give you a step-by-step approach, but don't be fooled. Step-by-step thinking is really causal-based reasoning and planning-based, and that for effectuation-based thinking and search, you need to keep the principles in mind. Don't just fill in the steps and create a bunch of post-it notes. Keep these higher-level principles in mind. Talked a little bit about the pedagogical pyramid, that you learn a subject usually at the baseline here. You learn the tools and the methods and the textbooks associated with these different step-by-step kind of approaches. But then as you learn more, you build the principles from this, and eventually by practicing these principles on an ongoing basis, you habitualize the principles and they turn into a mindset. So I'm spending most of my time talking about principles, and you can learn a lot of the tools by just reading some books out there. So that brings me to principle number 5, the affordable loss principle. Causal-based planning starts with predicting the size of the goal, looking at the size of the opportunity, and controlling the means to achieve this amazing outcome. Effectual thinking doesn't start with the end in mind. Effectual thinking starts with what are the means at my disposal. And so the affordable loss principle embeds this by saying, how much of your means are you willing to lose? So rather than starting by thinking about the end goal, you start by thinking about what do I have to lose? This is a broad principle with many different concretes that applies throughout all aspects of your life. But it started by looking at the actions of actual entrepreneurs and kind of trying to induce the abstract principle by looking at the data that arises from investigating the way, like, how do entrepreneurs think through a new opportunity? And we observed that entrepreneurs were very consistent in the way that they thought through learning as much as possible about an opportunity by putting in as little money and time and effort as possible in order to learn as quickly as possible. So rather than saying, well, I need $1 million to do this big thing, they'd start by saying, well, what can I do right away with the means at my disposal? And certainly it included talking to a customer right away or talking to a partner right away. And we talked about that in one of the previous principles. And we talked about co-creating the future, which they do. And that's one of the other principles as well. But there was also this deep mindset around creating prototypes in order to learn. This idea that you're not just testing and co-creating the future, but you're also setting tight limits on your risk and risk mitigation strategies and approaches. That this way that entrepreneurs would have a cautious commitment of incremental time and quick learning with minimal risk. Basically, they don't go all in right away and say, oh, that's a great idea, let me quit my job and go in. They say, well, let's do some testing and some experimentation and some prototyping first. So again, the affordable loss principle is, how do you dip your toe in the water and learn as much as possible without going all in? And this applies to all aspects of your life, whether it's finding a spouse or a job or moving or a degree program or even what health or sport you might choose to pursue. Think of it in terms of prototyping. Don't just marry the first person you meet. Take the time to get to know some other people and find out what are the kinds of people that I have a good relationship. What are the kinds of characteristics I'm looking for in a possible spouse? Again, don't just marry the first person that you meet. Or the same thing would be true of a new sport. You know, somebody introduces you to bicycling. Don't go out and buy a $5,000 bicycle after going out once. You might discover that you don't like bicycling, or that it hurts your hip, or that it's bad for you. Similarly, don't just decide, oh, I like sailing, let me go buy a $100,000 yacht the first time you decide you like sailing. No, like, dip your toe in the water first and go sailing with a bunch of other people. Maybe join a yacht club, maybe take some classes, learn how to crew with somebody else, and then discover whether you like sailing or not before you go all in and buy a boat or something like that. So the same thing is true of so many different ways to approach aspects of your life. Figure out, well, before I go invest a lot of money in a bike, let me do as little as possible. It's about looking at what you have to lose. Another way to think about it would be something as simple as wearing a mask. You know, I don't want to lose the woman that I love. My wife has an immunity disorder and she's in the very high risk category. And so how much am I really risking or losing by wearing a simple mask? I had a job before where I was a welder and I had to wear a mask 8 hours a day in oppressive heat with no air conditioning. I was lucky if I had a fan. Often my head was stuck inside a pressure vessel while I was welding. I wore a mask to save my life. It didn't feel like an infringement on my rights. In the same way, wearing a mask to protect my own life or my wife or other people in the society around me is not really a big loss to me. It's something that I'm happy to risk in order to get the benefits later on. The same idea of risking as little as possible applies to getting a job as well too. Don't just interview for a job and say, yes, I want it, and jump in with both feet and quit your other job. Take the time to do what I call life interviews, or interview other people, not for the sake of getting a job, but just to understand, what does life look like in your world? What does life look like at the company that you work for? Would this be the kind of people or the kind of company or the kind of values or the kind of culture that I want to spend my time with? So again, it's this idea of incrementally making commitments before going to the next stage. There's a variety of entrepreneurial skills and attitudes that are kind of bundled into this principle as well too. The idea of resourcefulness or bootstrapping. This idea that you can do a lot with a little, that rather than having to raise $1 million to start something, you can bootstrap your way to your first customers and prototype, or use minimum viable products in order to get those first customers. Again, you want to learn as much as possible through prototyping and incremental commitments. Entrepreneurial skills like frugality, lean learning, curiosity, and proactivity, but also building and testing things are all kind of bundled into this affordable loss principle. But there's a second very important aspect of the affordable loss principle as well that goes beyond just the idea of a prototype. And this is the idea of having a portfolio, or you've heard the expression, don't put all your eggs in one basket. That's also the affordable loss principle in action. It's not just making incremental commitments, but it's also about having a portfolio approach to things. So don't only date one person and decide you can't live without that one person. You might want to meet other people. Don't try only one exercise, or don't try only one sport. Try a variety of sports. Try a variety of cars before you buy one. In the same way, don't pick one job that you keep forever. Try a variety of jobs with these incremental approaches. So have a portfolio is also an aspect of the affordable loss principle. So this portfolio of career design challenges applies to your wheel of life. That you should have a variety of design challenges related to employers and jobs, side hustles, or testing the water in a variety of ways that enable you to build your human capital and your knowledge, skills, and attitudes, a variety of different social change-making events or social change-making projects that you're involved in, a variety of habits and a variety of habits and personal character development projects that you might be working on at any given time, and trying different approaches to find balance in your overall wheel of life. So having a portfolio approach to your design challenge is an important outcome of the affordable loss principle. This applies to the difference between a job and a career. For example, instead of having one single job, you might want to consider a portfolio of activities beyond the job that help you build your social capital and your knowledge, skills, and attitudes. You might want to consider, instead of one single full-time job, maybe having a portfolio of jobs or a variety of gigs or side hustles. You could also think about, instead of just jumping into a full-time job, dipping your toes into the water and prototyping it. And in a previous episode, we talked about this idea of digging the well before you're thirsty, but also when I gave you my principle around hiring a VP of sales at 3DNA, we talked about the idea of giving value before you ask for value. And again, this is this incremental approach to discovering whether you've got a good connection with the people you might be sharing your life with. We've only got one assignment this time. This particular assignment is based on the affordable loss principle, and it's the idea of having a portfolio of life interviews. So we're going to ask you to come up with a list of people that you're going to be speaking with, the issues and assumptions that you want to test by speaking with them, what questions you would ask of them during the interview, and then of course taking some notes on what you discovered and what you learned so that you can iterate and go back and learn more in the next round. Today we learned primarily the difference between principles and methods and tools, and introduced you to principle number 5, the affordable loss principle. We talked about 2 different aspects of the affordable loss principle. We talked about prototyping or bootstrapping and being resourceful, and we talked about a portfolio approach as a way to mitigate your losses. We talked about having a portfolio of design challenges, and we gave you an assignment regarding life interviews. So, thanks for joining me again today, and remember, Entrepreneurship's like learning how to play the guitar, crank it up to 11.